Very nice to be here. Very nice. I haven't been to the Brixton group for quite a few years, so really nice to be back, and good to be with you to celebrate Dharma Day. Amazing shrine. I love these blue lotuses. Incredible. Yeah. Okay, so I gave Pranya Gosha a sort of couple of titles of things that I could talk about on this day, and the one that got chosen was Dharma for Troubled Times. So I'm going to try and say something on that topic. Probably I don't need to convince you that we live in troubled times. We've just had a general election campaign, or a general election, and it was very strange, wasn't it? Very strange sense of disconnect. Very strange lack of enthusiasm for anything any of the parties were saying. A strange sense that the country is in a kind of mess and lots of things are broken and they're not really addressing the real issues. A very, very sort of strange sense of disconnect. Labour obviously won a big majority, but on a very, very small proportion of the vote. Very, very low turnout, one of the lowest turnouts in history. Just a very sort of strange. And we know that actually for quite some time, trust in politicians and trust in public institutions is at an all-time low. Just very, very sort of low levels of trust and engagement. Yeah, and another thing that's happened in recent years is into that vacuum come more extreme voices. Voices that once upon a time would have been on the kind of fringes and considered extreme become more mainstream, and you get a more kind of polarised, divisive public discourse going on. Yeah, and even a sense of people that are protesting against that, a sense of like I watch on TV the Just Stop Oil protesters blocking roads. When I see that, to be honest, it makes me sad, because what I sense is frustration. What I don't sense like a real attempt to kind of engage with people and convert people. I sense the kind of actions of people who are angry and frustrated and don't know what to do. Maybe some of you will disagree with that, you'll have a different take on it, but that's sort of what I see, what I sense. I kind of look, people just not knowing what to do. Yeah. And then, that's just Britain. Of course, if you go further afield, there are so many problems in the world. Terrible conflicts in Ukraine, a terrible situation in the Middle East. Appalling kind of suffering. Yeah. So we live in troubled times, in very challenging times. Yeah. So what would the Buddha do? Yeah. Or what would a bodhisattva do? A being on the cusp of enlightenment, gaining enlightenment for the sake of all beings. What would they do? Yeah. So I've just got 5 points that I'm going to try and make, which I think is what the Buddha would do, or what the Buddha would teach, or what a bodhisattva would do in this situation. There may be quite sort of challenging points. I hope that's okay. Yeah. But they're just sort of 5 reflections that came to me, trying to think, what would the Buddha do, or what would a bodhisattva do in this world, in this situation? Okay, so point number 1 is that the bodhisattva goes beyond both hope and despair. The bodhisattva goes beyond both hope and despair. Yeah. So many of you will know the image of the wheel of life, that image of a big wheel held by the monster of death, this image of samsara, this image of our kind of messed up world. It's a very kind of busy, rich image with all sorts of things going on inside it, which illustrate all sorts of Buddhist teachings. And part of the wheel of life, one of the innermost circles, it's kind of concentric circles, one of the innermost circles is one half, it's some figures ascending, kind of going up, and then the other half is some figures kind of falling down, descending. Yeah. And what I guess that symbolises, what that illustrates is, it's a wheel of life. Yeah, we're on a wheel of life, and if you're on a wheel, you will go up and then you'll go down. Yeah, that's absolutely kind of just inherent in the situation of being on a wheel. Yeah, it represents, this whole wheel of life represents the conditioned world, the world that's made of conditions. Yeah, and yeah, if things are kind of constructed out of conditions, they can be deconstructed. If things arise dependent, contingent on certain conditions, those conditions can change and things can fall apart. Yeah? So this upwards and downwards, ascending and descending, is just sort of illustrating about something about the conditioned nature of our existence. Yeah? And sometimes when I look at that little bit of the wheel of life, it reminds me particularly of the realm of politics. The kind of way politics just swings from one side or the other. So in America, you had Obama, then you had Trump, yeah, then you had Biden, yeah. Quite possibly, we're going to get Trump again, yeah. So I'm not going to tell you which one of those is up and down. You know, that depends on your political views. You know, some people will view it one way, some people will view it another way. In a way, I'm making a different point. I'm saying that's just how the world works. Yeah, there's just up and there's down. It swings. Yeah, it's never kind of sorted, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So there's two extreme responses to that situation. So one is the response of cynicism. Yeah, nothing will change. They're all the same. There's no point. Yeah, a kind of cynical response. Yeah, and the other response is a response of, you know, perhaps a kind of naive optimism, a kind of shallow optimism. Yeah, I remember in 1997 when Tony Blair was elected, my friends being, you know, some of my friends being really elated and joining the Labour Party and thinking it was a kind of new dawn of a, you know, and I remember the same when Obama was elected. You know, people thinking, oh, he's really going to change the world. Yeah. It's interesting. This time there isn't that sense of elation, is there? we're in a different phase. It's a very, very different mood at the moment. But that was the mood then. Yeah. And then of course it kind of swung into something else. Yeah. So yeah, these extremes of cynicism, skepticism, disillusionment, disappointment, versus optimism, hopefulness. I suppose what I'm kind of getting at is one of those is kind of nihilism, and one of them is eternalism from a Buddhist point of view. Yeah, they're both one-sided views. They're both partial views. Yeah, in a way, coming back to that image of the wheel of life and the figures going up and down, the cynical response is failing to believe that things can go up. Yeah, you just see the downwards. Yeah, your vision is sort of skewed, and that's all you kind of see is things going down, and you don't acknowledge that actually things are contingent, things are conditioned. You know, bad things can be undone, and better things can be made. Change is possible. Yeah, so that cynical response is one-sided. It's a kind of distorted view of things. Yeah, but similarly, the naive optimism is a sort of forgetting that things will go down. Yeah, anything that's created and conditioned can be undone again. It will kind of change sooner or later. You know, what's conditioned, what's made can be unmade again. So the Buddhist view, the wise view, goes beyond those extremes. Yeah, in a way, you could say that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is seeing the whole of life. Wisdom is not getting kind of sucked into a one-sided view of things, but always having a kind of broad, whole perspective where you see the whole of life. Yeah. Buddhism sees, you know, the up and the down, and in a way sees that, yeah, in samsara, they're kind of part of each other in a certain kind of way. There is a strand in Buddhist tradition which says it's actually better to be an eternalist than a nihilist. In a way, it's better to have hope and optimism than be a pessimist. Because at least if you've got that, there's some kind of basis for doing something. Do you see what I mean? It's some kind of positive basis, yeah? But the problem with that is that there's always that danger of oscillation. There's always that danger that things change and then your mood kind of swings into the opposite mood, as it were. Yeah. So I want to quote here from a Buddhist text called The Three Chief Paths, and it's by a famous Tibetan Buddhist teacher called Gampopa. It's his sort of very succinct summary of the Buddhist path. And one of the verses in that text says this: "Without a pure withdrawal, there's no means to still the longing for a happy outcome of the sea of existence." Without a pure withdrawal, there's no means to still the longing for a happy outcome of the sea of existence. Yeah. So the Buddhist position is, yes, the figures can go up. Yes, things can get better. Maybe there are things you can do. Maybe you've got certain skills and certain abilities and certain opportunities to get things to go up, and maybe you should do that. Yeah. And there's no happy outcome to the sea of existence. A conditioned world is still a conditioned world, yeah? It's still contingent, it's still unreliable, unstable, and impermanent, yeah? So a bodhisattva or a Buddha has a deeper motivation, yeah? They can help to, you know, for the wheel to go up, and they know it won't last, and they know it's not a kind of complete solution, as it were. Yeah. Maybe novice bodhisattvas, you know, they still oscillate. They can still get disappointed. There's a danger of, and then there's always a danger of kind of withdrawing back into self. There's always a danger of losing that bodhisattva spirit. Yeah. But yeah, a Buddha or a bodhisattva always stays in touch with that deeper motivation. Yeah. So to come back to that quote from Gampopa, it says, without a pure withdrawal. Yeah. So the word that's being translated as withdrawal is nisarana, which means something like not going for refuge. So not placing your reliance on something. Yeah. Not investing hope and meaning and happiness in worldly things. Yeah. So it's often translated as renunciation. But it's interesting and important. It says without a pure withdrawal. Yeah. So in a way, a cynic withdraws. A cynic does a certain kind of, well, I'm not bothered, and nothing's going to make any difference, and who cares? Yeah. But obviously, that's not a pure withdrawal. Yeah. It's actually, you know, the cynic is just a kind of disgruntled idealist, just a kind of disgruntled optimist in a way, and they've just, you know, just for now, swung to an opposite extreme. Yeah? So a pure withdrawal is not based on cynicism or aversion or frustration or anything like that. It's based on a kind of deeper wisdom, a deeper sort of seeing through the kind of illusion of samsara. Yeah. And then Gampopa says, without a pure withdrawal, there's no means to still the longing for a happy outcome, the sea of existence. Yeah. So that word means is significant. Yeah. So renunciation, withdrawal, it's a means, not an end. Yeah. Renunciation isn't a value in itself. What it is it's a means to still the longing for the happy outcome to samsara. Do you see what I mean? That's the transformation which really matters. That's really important. Yeah. So I don't know, a monk in the East, for example, might only take meals at a certain time of day. They might live a very, very simple life. But having meals at a certain time of day is not the point. Yeah. The point is to go beyond craving. The point is to sort of go beyond seeing that I can kind of get what I want and have a kind of happy existence within samsara. Yeah. It's that kind of deeper transformation which is really important. Yeah. So yeah, these emotions, cynicism, frustration, disappointment, despair, hopelessness, but even a kind of worldly hope and optimism are in a way signs that we're still invested in a happy outcome to the sea of existence. Yeah? We're still going to kind of oscillate. And in a way that's totally human and totally understandable. But in a way what we're trying to cultivate is a deeper motivation. Yeah? The Bodhisattva can work for others and they have no illusions about samsara. Yeah? And even more than that, the Bodhisattva can kind of keep going despite the ups and downs because they're driven by a deeper motivation. Yeah? So that's point number one. Going beyond both hope and despair. Yeah. So point number two, that the Bodhisattva or the Buddha orientates their lives to the pole star, to the light from beyond. Yeah. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to quote from a book by a Buddhist writer called David Brazier. So he wrote a book once called Buddhism is a Religion and You Can Believe It. Buddhism is a religion and you can believe it. So it's one of those books where quite a bit of the message is in the title. Yeah. And he's had, some of you might kind of know this or guess this, he's having a pop at another Buddhist writer, a very respected Buddhist writer called Stephen Batchelor, who wrote a book called Buddhism Without Beliefs. Buddhism Without Beliefs. In many ways, probably a very good book, which has introduced a lot of people to Buddhism. But in that book, Batchelor's approach generally is a more kind of skeptical, rationalistic, secular, kind of modernist kind of Buddhism. Yeah? And David Brazier is taking issue with this, and he's saying, no, Buddhism is a religion, and you can believe it. Yeah. So what is a religion? Yeah. So first of all, Brazier says, well, it's not, so Buddhism or a religion is not kind of meditation practices or a whole system of meditation. It's not a code of ethics. It's not a kind of philosophy or a system of thought. It's not beautiful rituals and liturgy. Buddhism is not a way of life. It's not a kind of cultural flowering. It's not a better society. It's not an aesthetic. It's not a kind of civilization. It's not social projects. Yeah. Buddhism may do all of those things. It may inspire all of those things. Those things might kind of manifest out of people practicing Buddhism and orientating their lives towards Buddhism. But that's not essentially what Buddhism is. Yeah. And he then uses the metaphor of the pole star. Yeah. He says, what's kind of essential is this star that's there in the sky. And you gaze up at this star and you orientate your life by it. Yeah. So it's this bright star in the sky that's always there. And you gaze up and you keep looking up. And that's how you orientate your life. That's how you know which way to go, as it were. Yeah. Although it seems far away, it's always there, and it draws you on. Yeah. You can, in a way, put your faith in it. You can trust it. You can follow it. You can allow it to guide your life. And if you do that, it will take you beyond you as you currently are. Yeah. So for Buddhism, the pole star is nirvana, or awakening, or bodhi, or enlightenment, or bodhicitta. It gets described in a number of ways in the Buddhist tradition. Yeah. But he's saying that's essentially what Buddhism is, or what the Dharma is. It's that thing from beyond by which you guide your life. Yeah. And if you forget about the pole star, and in a way he's saying the danger of secular Buddhism is, you start to kind of lower your sights and you leave out the pole star. Sooner or later, you'll kind of miss where it's all really pointing. Yeah. You'll misorientate. You won't be drawn along. You won't be drawn beyond in the way that the pole star can draw you beyond. Yeah. And that means that Buddhism collectively won't manifest all those kind of great things that it's manifested. It won't be able to make such a great contribution to humanity. So in Buddhism we have a lot of emphasis on practice. We talk about practices, we teach techniques to help people transform their minds and their hearts. So there's an emphasis on practice. But practice happens within a whole context. And part of the kind of wider context of a practice is it's always done with a particular view, a particular kind of idea that kind of shapes and guides how you engage with that practice. That view might be more conscious and articulated, or it might be less conscious or articulated. But whenever you sit down to do a practice, you bring a certain view to it. There are certain ideas about why you're doing that practice and what's likely to happen and what the kind of ultimate meaning and purpose of doing that practice is. And those views will condition, even determine, what's the possible fruits of that practice. So just to give a little example of that, say I'm practicing the dhyanas, so the kind of traditional Buddhist idea of higher states of consciousness, higher states of absorption, which are possible to sort of cultivate and dwell in. I might be doing that from a kind of materialistic point of view, that, they're just funny brain states that I can get into, but they're really great, so let's do that, Or I might be doing it with a kind of deeper view of them basically being states where the whole self-other structure starts to kind of soften and, kind of open up in a kind of interesting way. Do you see what I mean? So there's two kind of possible views with which you could engage with those practices. And you might well be able to get into kind of dhyana from both of those views. But I would say, nevertheless, what it's going to mean, the whole way you're going to interpret what happens, and therefore what it means, and therefore what's likely to kind of further unfold from that, totally depends on the view that you have. Can you see what I mean? From those different views, your practice will unfold in different ways. And there are certain things which could unfold this way that won't unfold this way, because there's a kind of different view. There's a much more kind of limited view of what it's about, what it means, what the kind of significance of what's happening is. So the view is crucial, or the pole star is crucial. So bringing this back to Buddhism in troubled times, I'd argue if you want nice, comfortable, harmless, good people, secular Buddhism is fine. If you want bodhisattvas, you need religion. You need the pole star. You need something else, something beyond. There's that famous quote from W.B. Yeats. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. He said that apparently in 1921. Maybe you could argue it's even more true 100 years later. I think that's something Ambedkar would have agreed with. For those of you who've not heard of Dr. Ambedkar, he's a very important figure in our Buddhist community. He was a great leader of the so-called untouchables, people oppressed by the caste system in India, and he worked tirelessly for that uplift and eventually converted to Buddhism as a way of himself and his people moving out of the oppression of the caste system. And that was his belief. His belief was that in order to really have a better world, in order to really inspire a better society, you needed something deep. It needed to kind of rest on something ultimate. That was what was really needed in order to really kind of motivate people to change, to go beyond themselves. You needed, to put it another way, you needed enough people to believe that we can really be truly moral and truly human. And if you didn't believe that, well, how would you keep going? and those of you who know about his life and what he had to put up with and the kind of abuse and oppression that he suffered, how could he have done that? How could he have kind of kept going so ceaselessly for the benefit of his people if deep down there hadn't been this belief that people were fundamentally decent and could change and could become kind of moral and could treat each other as real human beings? Yeah. So I think Ambedkar would have agreed with this quote from James Baldwin. James Baldwin said, "The political institutions of any nation are always menaced and are ultimately controlled by the spiritual state of the nation." Yeah. The political institutions of any nation are always menaced and are ultimately controlled by the spiritual state of the nation. Yeah. Or putting it the other way round, it's through spiritual transformation, spiritual revolution, that real, genuine social change and revolution becomes possible. And finally, on this point about the pole star, I just want to, jump to our context, Triratna, and an image of Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna, in the very, very early days. He met with just a handful of people in the New Forest, sometime in 1974, I think it was. And he talked to them about the myth of Avalokiteshvara. He talked to them about the myth of bringing Buddhism to the West, that they could bring the Dharma to the West. They could become this Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara with these 1,000 arms reaching in all directions. They could individually be a hand and an arm of Avalokiteshvara connected to this one sort of spiritual body, which was the Sangha that they were founded. He gave them this kind of huge myth to live by. And in a way you could have looked at it and thought it was ridiculous. It was just a kind of handful of ex-hippies. They knew nothing about Buddhism. They were all totally new to the Dharma. They had no money, they had no resources, they weren't linked into the Buddhist world in any kind of way. In a way it was crazy, yeah. But he gave them this sort of powerful myth, which deeply inspired them, and that they wanted to live by or live in. They wanted to be part of that myth, yeah. In other words, he gave them a sort of pole star and a way to orientate their lives to the pole star. And the result was that more and more people just gave themselves to it. And many of them, when I wrote the Triratna story, I heard all these stories in the early days of, people getting an inheritance and just giving it away to buy a Buddhist centre. People made the most extraordinary kind of sacrifices. That's how our movement came about. Yeah, it came about because there was this deep myth, this sort of sense of something else that you could kind of live by, that you could kind of give your life by. Yeah. So the Bodhisattva orientates their lives to the pole star and to the light from beyond. Point number 3. The Bodhisattva generates energy of self-transcendence through service to community. So I want to quote here, there was a study I read about, a study of 200 American communes. I think it was done sometime early 20th century, this study, and the person who did the study looked at them over quite a number of years. And roughly half the communes were religious in nature, so probably kind of radical Christian communes, and roughly half of them were more political communes, so probably, anarchist, utopian, socialist communes, yeah. So of the 100 political communes, only 6 of them lasted more than 20 years. Only 6, yeah. And then of the roughly 100 religious communities, 39 of them lasted more than 20 years, yeah. So still not a majority, interesting, but 6 times more likely to keep going than the political communities. Yeah. And the researcher then looked at the reason why. Why would there be such a big difference? Yeah. And his theory was that it came down to the problem of what's called free riders. That in any community there'll be people that they hang around and benefit, but they don't contribute anything. Yeah, or at least other people feel they don't contribute anything, so that, and the idea was that in the political communities they couldn't solve that problem, and therefore it wasn't ultimately sustainable, and it just kind of fizzled out. You can sort of imagine it, can't you? You're all kind of living together. There's different kind of views, there's different kind of likes and dislikes, and you end up having endless meetings talking about things, and they go on and on and on. In my early days, they're in smoke-filled rooms. They're probably not in smoke-filled rooms these days, but the kind of thing, just endless meetings, and people just get ground down and fed up, and eventually it's like, oh, hang it, I'm just going to go off and do what I want. That's what happens. So again, it's that optimism, cynicism swing again, isn't it? Whereas in some of the religious communities, a different thing was possible. It rested on a vision, the pole star again, that enabled a deeper spirit of cooperation and service. There was something beyond me and my life as it is now that I was prepared to sort of orientate to, even give myself to, that kind of drew out a deeper sense of cooperation and service. So in other words, in those religious communities, people could see the way of life as good in itself, as a means to grow, even if it didn't kind of match all my personal preferences or exactly how I like things to be. I could see that in another way it was kind of potentially good for me, that it allowed me to go beyond myself, that kind of idea of service had a kind of benefit. I could connect my growth, my development, with the kind of common goal, with the common good of a bigger community, a bigger group of people. And therefore I could serve, I could cooperate, I could even make sort of sacrifices. So my point here is, if you want to be a bodhisattva, you need that. You need some way of connecting what's a good life for you with the good of others, with a sense of common good. And it's the pole star that allows you to make that connection. It's some kind of higher value, higher ideal or higher aspiration that allows you to connect those two things to a higher third thing, if that makes sense. Without the pole star, I think ultimately you either withdraw it into self, or you get into sort of bypassing self, martyring self, and then eventually kind of burn out somewhere down the line, as it were. You get stuck, you can't grow. There's something crucial about serving a community, or serving not a group bigger than just you, with a shared vision, with an orientation to something else, to a kind of pole star. And of course what that is and what that will look like will be different for different people, but I'm arguing there's something potentially transformative and radical that creates that kind of energy of self-transcendence. And I say potentially transformative because it's not easy. It's rare. It was only 39%, as it were. But that's point number 3. The bodhisattva generates the energy of self-transcendence through service to community. Okay, point number 4. Sorry if this is all a bit pokey, but point number 4 is the bodhisattva faces the problem of death. So here I'm quoting from a talk by Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna. So he once gave a talk called Buddhism, World Peace and Nuclear War. It was actually given at the Croydon Buddhist Centre in 1984, which was a sort of almost the height of the Cold War. This sort of standoff between the Western nations and the Soviet Union, a huge proliferation of nuclear weapons. And, in a lot of countries in Europe and in America, a lot of resistance to that, big protests. So in Britain there was the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Some of the biggest political protests in history were by C&D in the 1980s, big marches in London, Green and Common, places like that. So as a response to this, Sangharakshita gave this talk, Buddhism, World Peace and Nuclear War. It's a really brilliant and profound talk. If you want to know Sangharakshita's ideas on responding to world problems, I would say that is the seminal talk or seminal text to read. Yeah? And there's something in it where he just keeps going deeper. He sort of makes a point, you think, oh yeah, that's good, yeah, kind of agree with that. And then he just pushes it a bit further, takes it a sort of stage further. Yeah. So he starts off talking about what's called the conflict at Rohini, which was an incident in the Buddha's life where there was a conflict between two tribes over the rights to water in a particular river. And it was deeply personal for the Buddha because one of the tribes was the tribe that his mother came from, and the other tribe was the tribe that his father came from. And they were coming into conflict, and the warriors were arming themselves. There was all sorts of insults being exchanged, and the real possibility of conflict and people taking up arms and bloodshed. Yeah. So the Buddha went there and got into dialogue with people, and apparently asked them, well, how much is water worth? They said, well, it's not worth very much. And then he said, well, how much is a warrior worth? Well, a warrior is priceless, beyond, can't be priced. So in other words, he uses a kind of calm, grounded reason to kind of make them see the kind of insanity of what they're doing and to avert the kind of bloodshed and the conflict. So Sangharakshita sort of, he kind of advocates this sort of same sort of sanity and compassion in relation to our world problems. So you think, oh great, yeah, good, that sounds good. And then he just sort of takes it on a stage. Yeah. He says the thing is, even if you solve that conflict, you've only solved it for now. And actually, you haven't really solved the problem of death. Yeah. That warrior might have been spared death in battle right now, but they still have to die one day. Yeah. So you could even say, have you really fundamentally solved anything? Yeah. And he says, thinking about the problem death, it's not morbid, it's human. Yeah. Humans are creatures with self-awareness. We're creatures that are able to be aware of our own mortality. And therefore, to live a truly human life is not to sort of avert or avoid that awareness, but to really go into it, to really face it. Yeah, it's by facing the problem of death, by facing our mortality, that our humanity can really be fulfilled, can be truly fulfilled, even transcended. Yeah. And he says, if we solve the problem of death, the other problems of the world would be totally, radically recontextualized. It's totally seen in a different light. Yeah. In a way, they wouldn't matter so much. Yeah. If there was no fear of death, if we've solved the problem of death, there's nothing to be frightened of. There's nothing to kind of grasp hold of or crave for. Yeah. And at the same time, if you've solved the problem of death, you're in the best position to really see and to really understand the true cause, the deep roots of those world problems. And you're in the best position to respond helpfully. Yeah? You've got the wisdom, you've got the perspective, you've got the compassion, you've got the awareness to be able to respond in the most helpful kind of way. Yeah? So this is how Sangharakshita puts it in the talk. He says, if we solve the problem of death, it will not, in the most fundamental sense, matter whether we solve the problem of world peace or not. Though, paradoxically, if we do succeed in solving the problem of death, then we shall, in all probability, succeed in solving the problem of world peace and nuclear war too. Yeah? So quite a strong point, maybe quite a challenging point, but really getting us to see the deep cause of these problems. and saying that, yeah, if we don't address that deep cause, we never really solve those problems. Yeah, it's actually the problem of death, the fear of death, that ultimately underlies all those other challenges, all those other problems. Just want to read a famous quote from David Foster Wallace. You might have heard this before. It does get quoted quite often. He says, "In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they're where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you'll die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, and you'll feel weak and afraid, and you'll need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay." Yeah? So strong words, but in a way saying the same thing. Yeah. Because that fear of death is ultimately a fear of loss of self, and that's what samsara is. It's that kind of finding things to sort of bolster and prop up and maintain a sense of self, but it's futile. It just creates more insecurity, more fear, more uncertainty, and it's that which just keeps the whole kind of samsaric craziness going round and round and round. Yeah, where there's self, there's other. Yeah, and where there's other, there's eventually conflict and trouble. We need to face the problem of death. We need to go beyond that fear. We need to go beyond self and other to really kind of address the problems of the world. Yeah. So point number 5, final point. Bodhisattvas believe in kindness and a shared humanity. So, I'll just tell you a little story that happened to me once a few years ago. I was waiting to meet a friend to go for a coffee in the town centre where I lived at the time. I was just waiting in the street, and I noticed this woman walking up the street. She sort of immediately caught my eye because she looked troubled. She was sort of stomping up the street quite angrily. I could sort of immediately sort of tell that. And because she was in this state, she passed by a mother and a child, and she accidentally, but a little bit roughly, brushed up against the little child as she walked past. Yeah. And the mother looked up, and rather than sort of being able to take in that situation and think, oh, she's obviously a bit kind of in a bit of a state, the mother just snapped and said, "Why don't you look where you're going?" Something like that. Yeah. And then the angry woman sort of looked round, and rather than saying, "Oh yeah, I've just brushed up against the child and she's the mother, so obviously she's a bit kind of protective," she blurted something back. Can't remember what she said, but she sort of shouted something back. Yeah. And they started getting into a little bit of a kind of, a ding-dong about it. And then I was just sort of standing a few yards away watching this. And then someone else who'd seen what happened started walking over to the first angry woman, doing this to kind of put them right, put them straight. And then someone else started coming over, and it was like suddenly out of nowhere, this sort of ugly, one moment it was just a kind of ordinary street, and then this little kind of hell was emerging out of nowhere, out of nothing. Yeah. And I started thinking, oh dear, what am I going to do? It's looking a bit kind of ugly. Maybe I'm going to have to kind of go over and try and sort of say something and just try and diffuse the situation. So I started walking over, slightly kind of reluctantly, sort of feeling the kind of resistance and kind of not really knowing what I was going to say when I got there. And then I saw this other woman coming up the street. There was this young woman coming up the street, and I could tell that she'd also sort of just taken in what had happened. And she walked up the street, and as she just walked, she just linked arms with the angry woman, who sort of looked round and looked at her. And she just looked at her very kind of kindly and directly in the eye and said, "Come on, love, you don't need to worry about all that." She immediately kind of softened, and she just walked off with her. That's what I just wanted to applaud. It was so well done. It was very, very skillful. And she just walked safely round the corner and then obviously kind of let her go. And then all the other people had been getting so steamed up. It was just like, oh, and they just sort of went back to normal. And so this, one moment it was a normal street, then it was a little kind of hell, and then it all just sort of disappeared again and went back to a normal street again. It was like magic. I was hoping the woman was going to come back and I was going to say that. How did you do that? That was amazing. Thank you. Actually, what it made me realise is train now so you're ready later. Yeah. See your practice as training. See your metta bhavana as you're training yourself so that when those moments come, you know what to do. You instinctively know what to do. Yeah. There's a kind of readiness that comes out of our training. Our practices that we do make it more likely that in that moment we'll find a good way to respond. Yeah. So it was kindness. Yeah, she was able to sort of take in what was happening and just meet it with a kind of softness and kindness which totally disarmed and allowed something to sort of transform in an instance. Yeah. So I want to quote from Ambedkar again, jumping back to Ambedkar, the great leader of the so-called untouchables. He also had a very, very strong emphasis on metta, on loving kindness, as the basis for any decent kind of society. Yeah. Again, he said, without metta, you just have competing groups with their interests, fighting for their own interests. Yeah. It's only through metta, it's only with metta that you can have a bigger sense of common humanity, and therefore a sense of a common good. Yeah. And it's only with that sense of common humanity and common good that you can have a basis for communication, a basis for cooperation, a basis of people being able to listen to each other and come to compromises. Yeah? All those things are what any kind of decent society needs to be based on. Yeah? So Ambedkar talked about democracy not just as a system for electing a government, but as something much deeper. It was a sort of attitude or a spirit of fraternity, or of fellow feeling, or of human respect, or common humanity. Yeah? Democracy was something about what you truly believed about human life. Yeah? About the true nature and purpose and meaning of human life. Yeah? For him, the metta bhavana was about cultivating a sort of democratic heart or mind, yeah, about cultivating the ability, in a way to be a citizen and in a way to meet with others in that spirit, on that basis of fellow feeling and common humanity. And it was that was needed if you were going to build a better society. Yeah. So we have this incredible practice of the metta bhavana, such a profound practice, such a deep practice, but also a practice with such kind of broad, big implications, potentially, for the world. Yeah, this practice where we're basically trying to cultivate that sense of common humanity. Yeah, and common humanity. And often when I do the practice, I think in terms of, the kind of joys and the sorrows that I share with other human beings, the kind of common hopes and fears that all human beings have. Common happiness, desire to be happiness, and to desire to be happy and to avoid pain. and so on. But it's also that common potential. Yeah, that common humanity is a common potential for awakening, for more awareness, for more wisdom and compassion. So again, that kind of pole star coming in. Yeah. So I'm just going to read a quote from Sangharakshita. Many of you will know it's a famous quote where he also talks about the importance of that common humanity, very much in the spirit of Ambedkar. Yeah. I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it is possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly and deeply believe. This belief is part of my own experience. It's part of my own life. It's part of me. I cannot give up this belief, and I would rather die than give it up. Yeah, so that was Sangharakshita in a talk in India, actually. Very much expressing that same spirit as Ambedkar. There won't be a better world without more loving kindness. Yeah, so we need to train our hearts and our minds in kindness. Okay, so just coming to an end now, coming to a conclusion. I'd like to end by reflecting on the life of the Buddha and the times of the Buddha. Yeah. So the kind of common image of the Buddha is a serene, calm, peaceful figure. That's the sort of popular image. But actually the Buddha did not have an easy life. The Buddha lived in extremely troubled times, extremely turbulent times. And that turbulence and that trouble came very, very close to him personally. Yeah. So we've already touched on the quarrel at Kosambi, the quarrel over the water, which involved people from his mother's tribe and people from his father's tribe. There's also a Buddhist text called the Atadanda Sutta, very short text in which the Buddha remembers another time in his childhood where there was a conflict, and him watching this sort of conflict kind of build up, and how disturbed he was. It's very, very, very interesting little text, very, very graphic language. He talks about feeling totally distraught and deeply disturbed and troubled, seeing people locked in conflict and seeing the kind of the horror that could possibly kind of result from that. Yeah. So obviously there were things in his childhood that he kind of grew up with, which sort of deeply, deeply troubled him and probably motivated him to kind of look for a kind of another answer to his things. And also, if you read the Parinibbana Sutta, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which describes the last weeks of the Buddha's life, he goes on this sort of final tour, this final journey with Ananda, who's his cousin, and his sort of his PA, his attendant. And they go and visit various people, go and see various things. But again, on this journey, there's lots of difficult things they encounter. Yeah, so they hear that there's a king, King Pasenadi, who was a patron of the Buddha and a friend of the Buddha. He's been deposed, and he's fled to a nearby city and died of exhaustion at the gates of that city. So this is what's going on. It's a kind of turbulent time. Yeah. There's the Magadhans, I think it is, a particular tribe who go to war with the Shakyans, which is the Buddha's and Ananda's father's tribe. So members of their family are caught up in war and bloodshed. Then there's a certain point where they come across this fortress being built. And it's being built by the Magadhans to prepare for war against another tribe called the Vajraguptas. Yeah? And some people from the ascent from the Magadhan tribe to ask the Buddha for advice, and he tries to dissuade them. He kind of gives them all these reasons why it would not be a good idea to go to war with the Vajraguptas. He does his best to sort of avert this conflict. But after they've gone, he confides to Ananda. He says, I don't think it's going to make any difference. I don't think it's going to work. He knows. He can kind of see that there are certain little kind of empires which are on the way down, and there's another kind of empire which is on the way up. He knows what's going on. He kind of sees the truth of this samsaric existence, yeah? This kind of decline and rise and decline and rise, yeah? That's the situation. He lived in very, very difficult times, yeah? And he's got, I don't know, maybe has he got a few hundred followers? Maybe it's more. Maybe he's got a few thousand followers. But it's interesting, isn't it? He doesn't know he's the founder of a major world religion. He's just got this band of followers in this turbulent world. Maybe it's all going to disappear in a few years. He doesn't know. There's no way he could know. Yeah, there's no way he could have known that in the future, billions of people would be inspired by his teaching, would have their lives transformed by his teaching, would be uplifted by the example of his life and teaching. There's no way he could have known that 2,500 years later, a bunch of people would be sitting in a room in Brixton on a rainy Saturday afternoon talking about his teachings. Yeah, he couldn't know any of that. He couldn't be kind of guided by any of that. Yeah, he was sort of inspired by deeper things, deeper forces. Yeah, he went beyond both hope and despair, and he encouraged his followers to go beyond hope and despair. Yeah, he reminded them, his final words were, impermanent are all conditioned things. They cannot be relied upon. Yeah, and those emotional responses of hope and despair show us where, those sort of ups and downs, that kind of oscillation, shows us where we're placing our reliance. Yeah, he constantly urged his followers to orientate their life towards that pole star of nirvana, of the deathless, of awakening. Yeah, to orientate to that light from beyond. Yeah, that's what will draw something great out of you. That's what will inspire something great in a culture or between a group of people. Yeah, he urged them to generate the energy of self-transcendence through service to community. That's what he did. He formed a community. He set it up very, very carefully, and he gave them a way to connect those two things, their kind of own good and their own growth, and the common good and the common growth. He gave them a way to sort of resolve the tension between those two things by putting it in service to this higher thing, this pole star, this higher ideal, which can resolve the conflict and draw out that kind of greater, deeper energy. He constantly urged them to face the problem of death and pointed out how that underlies all the other kind of fears and problems of this world. And he believed in and practiced kindness and common humanity. And of course that was Ananda's famous comment at the end of the Buddha's life. When Ananda was grieving, right at the very end, his comment was, the famous comment, he who was so kind. Yeah, that's what most struck him most deeply about the Buddha. That's what really stood out. He who was so kind. Yeah, despite all the turbulence, despite all the trouble, despite all the kind of awful things that were going on, he was able to stay in contact with kindness. He was able to meet all people with kindness. Yeah, and that's what made that genuine transformation possible. That was the Buddha's ultimate Dharma for troubled times. Thank you.